chemical, we did cells now. Now we're looking at tissues and our definition of the tissue, two or more types of cells that are all kind of carrying out the same basic sort of function. There are 4 types of tissue. I'm going to go ahead and give you this little tissue summary I have right here of all the tissue types, so if you want to kind of follow along. Epithelial tissue is surface tissue. Okay, so that means that wherever you have a surface, whether it's on your skin or inside of one of your tubes, there's an epithelial layer right there. All right, connective tissue is going to be under the surface. All right, and so we'll be using mainly the examples we use in laboratory as we look at these. All right, we also have nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is our communicating and control tissue. This is going to be, of course, in the brain, spinal cord, and with your nerves. And then we also have muscle tissue, which is our tissue for movement. Now, we will be talking under epithelium, covering and lining. That's our surface stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about glands briefly, and then later on we'll see more with those. Under the connective tissue, we're going to talk about stuff in the embryo, mesenchyme, which gives rise to all the adult connective tissues right here, 4 kinds of adult connective tissues, and then again muscle and nerve. These we talk about later. They'll come up with the systems when these come up. These are the ones we're going to be talking about here right now. So when you look at a typical illustration through like a organ structure, you see epithelium at the top there in yellow, again on the surface. All of this down below it is connective tissue through here. A little hint right through here of muscle. Always going to be nervous tissue, right? There will always be nervous tissue. Not really showing in the illustration right here, but again, always will be nervous. You always have a connection back to the brain and the spinal cord. So most of our organs will have all 4 of the tissues, even though a couple of them only have 2, all right? So, again, that's kind of the general orientation. Now, as we think here of epithelium in terms of characteristics, it's going to form a continuous layer. Cells can be packed tightly together, so you can see we got 3 cells right there forming a layer. And again, there's not really any space between them. One surface on the epithelium, because it is surface, is always exposed to the environment. And this surface out here will typically have some kind of a modification that will reflect its function in the environment. Okay? We'll talk a little bit about extracellular material with connective tissue. We really don't have very much at all extracellular material, I mean stuff that lies outside of the cell with epithelium. It does produce mucus. We kind of talked about that with the pseudostratified and goblet cells, but that's about the only type of extracellular material that we have. Of course, that's not showing on here. Again, we have nerve receptors. You can see that little yellow deal going up there into the epithelium, so again, connection to the nervous system. And then otherwise, one of the things that has to happen at the surface, because surfaces are damaged, epithelium has to be able to divide by cell division, to replace itself, to repair itself. And so as these cells get killed, damaged, or whatever, just new cells form, right, to replace them. So that's kind of an interestingly unique characteristic for tissue, because as adults, this is really the bulk of the tissue that actually retains the ability to divide. All the other tissue kind of quits dividing, unless you're wounded, right? But again, in general, the epithelium is always dividing. Okay? Now, as far as function goes, the epithelium we have here on our epidermis is protection, because it's real thick. This is not a protective type of tissue here, but at the same time, this is the type of tissue that might be involved in secretion of substances to the outside or absorption of materials to the inside. And we very often have these extensions here on the surface of the cell called microvilli, and they basically what increase the surface area for secretion or absorption. And so obviously if it's a flat top, you have a certain amount of surface area, but if it's all like a bunch of little finger-like projections sticking up, you dramatically increase the amount of the ability for secreting and absorbing substances. All right, and then otherwise, we of course do detect stimuli because most of the things on the outside right here will be of course responding to the surfaces right here. So again, three functions. Thinking about protection, again, we're talking about the thick epithelium like we have in our epidermis. This one is more directly related to, again, secreting and absorbing substances. All epithelia has receptors, right? So again, detecting the stimuli for whatever's going on there in their environment. Now, again, we're going to look at, in terms of the regular epithelium, covering and lining on a surface, simple squamous to stratified squamous. These are the three we looked at in laboratory already. We haven't really talked too much about glands aside from sweat glands with the skin, but we will mention briefly exocrine glands versus endocrine glands for glandular epithelium. Now, when we talk about the covering and lining, again, we've got two issues right here in terms of its characterization. Right, the first thing is the number of cell layers that are involved in the tissue. If you have one layer of cells, this is characterized as a simple type of epithelium. If you have two or more layers, this is characterized as stratified. Okay. Second thing that's important here for characterizing the covering and lining surface epithelium, cell shape. And there are three principal shapes. Squamous means that it is kind of like this tile right here where it looks real big when you look straight down on it. When you pick it up and look at it from the side, very thin. Okay. This is the type that's really associated with, again, absorption and secretion, filtering and stuff like that. You know, cuboidal just means it's got kind of a box shape to it. Columnar means that it is taller than wide. So, again, a simple squamous, like for the air sacs of the lungs, means that the cells are real thin, right? One layer. Okay. Simple cuboidal means one layer, but you got box-shaped cells. Simple columnar means one layer with column-shaped cells, tall cells. Okay? That one right there, that picture would be a simple columnar type of tissue, because you can see it's only one layer of cells, but the cells are tall relative to their width. All right, this one right here, again, same thing, simple, because it's one cell layer, again, columnar, because again, the cells are much taller than they are wide. Okay. This one right here would be stratified, because the base of the epithelium is down here, and you've got multiple layers of cells right there. Happens to be squamous because the surface cells aren't thin and flat. This would be a protected type of epithelium right here. Word about, go ahead.
How do you differentiate between cuboidal and columnar?
Well, cuboidal is like a square.
Oh,
It's as high, tall as it is wide, or columnar is like much taller.
so it'll be like an exact square whenever you're looking
Yeah,
at it.
it looks like a pretty much a square. Kind of like these. See how these look, right? Just a word about the glands. We come back to these later. All of the glands themselves also are derived from epithelium. We have two kinds of glands, exocrine, which we were talking about with the skin, with the sweat glands and the oil glands, the sebaceous glands. Always have a little tube that leads their product up to the surface where the product's going to function. Endocrine glands form basically the same way as an exocrine, except they lose the tube. And you're left with the glandular component down here, and again, that then in turn secretes into the blood rather than into a tube. Okay? So, the examples for exocrine, again, we already talked about the skin. So, eccrine sudoriferous type of a gland, sweat gland, perspiration gland, got a little tube, leads to the surface. Sebaceous gland across here secretes oil onto the surface of the hair, have a tube. So they're exocrine type glands. Salivary glands, a bunch of little tubes in there, right? And of course, all directing saliva from the gland into your mouth. Feel it right now. Right? So again, salivary. Goblet cell, we talked about pseudostratified. Again, that actually is a little single cell gland. And again, when it excretes its substance, mucus in here, it kind of comes out onto the surface. All right, the example I have here for an endocrine gland is your thyroid gland. All right, and so later on, of course, we'll be talking about this, but these don't have any tubes that lead to any surface. They're just putting thyroid hormone into the blood. Lots of blood vessels on it, and then the blood circulates the thyroid hormone to the places in the body where it's going to have its effect. But again, the secreting parts of the glands are epithelium. All right, so that's the overview, and then again, we looked at simple squamous, pseudostratified, and we looked at the stratified squamous in the laboratory. So just again to kind of remind you about that. So the simple squamous itself, simple means it's one layer thick. Again, these cells are real thin when you look at them from the side. And so again, like the tile, looks pretty big straight down. Pick it up, of course, it's super, super thin. This is illustrating that it is located in the air sacs of the lungs, and that was my representative location. And then here we have a micrograph showing that this is membranes right here, just like a bunch of little simple squamous cells, all defining that opening. Okay? Here's the one I showed you in the laboratory. This is the micrograph we used in there, right? So again, simple squamous epithelium, air sac, that's where your oxygen exchange, CO2 exchange is occurring in the lungs. All right, pseudostratified epithelium. So this is pseudostratified because it kind of appears to be multi-layer, but it's really only one layer. We're showing right here that all the cells kind of begin down at this point, but some are tall, some are shorter, and so on. But there's just really one layer of cells. The trachea, windpipe is our example we used in the laboratory for this. And you can't really see very well on this right here, but there are goblet cells, and then there are cilia out here on the surface. And I showed you this picture, I think, there, just again to emphasize the goblet cells right there, the little white deals with all the mucus, and the little fringe of stuff on the outside is the cilia. This is the one I actually had in lab for micrographs. So again, the bottom of the epithelium is here. It does look multi-layered, but it really isn't. Goblet cells again in the membrane, and again cilia here on the outside. And again, the trachea is our representative location. All right, and then the stratified squamous, which again we had a non-keratinized living, and we had keratinized for the epidermis of the skin. Multi-layered because it's stratified. Again, begins right here. There's like 20 to 30 to 50 layers depending on where it is, particularly with the skin. Cells at the top thin and flat, showing again with the diagram, just lots and lots of layers of cells. And again, our oral cavity, your esophagus, vagina, any of those are locations for this non-keratinized stratified squamous. And non-keratinized just means that the surface cells are alive at maturity, right? They're always alive. And again, showed you a micrograph with this one, but something like this for the example. All right, remember for the skin, we talked about the epidermis the other day. Again, the bottom is down here, so all of this is the multiple layers of the epidermis. Stratified squamous, again, thin and flaky at the top. Skin is characterized as keratinized because everything from this point up is dead. Skin actually serves as functional when it's dead. So again, being flaked off. But the structure of the stratified squamous here is equivalent to the structure of the stratified squamous like in your mouth. It's just this stuff's alive at maturity of the surface, this right here dead at maturity. All right, and then here's the one I showed you for my picture for the tissues. Again, stratified squamous. Again, it goes all the way up there. All right, so we'll pick up with this the next time.